Yes? Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Audrey Jarvis, and I'm very pleased to welcome first our candidates. There's one more to come, but we have an apology for lateness, so I hope I'll bring a note for the teacher. And welcome to you, the audience, who by coming here today have shown the importance you attach to the issues that we're discussing. Your hosts today are Wesley Broadway Methodist Church, where I come from, and which started off this idea, St David's Presbyterian Church, St Peter's and All Saints Anglican Churches, Environment Network Manawatu, and Manawatu branch of Forest and Birds. So that's a wide range of people, all here because we believe in the importance of the issues that we want to talk about today. So thank you to these organisations for their support, to All Saints for the free use of their building and their facilities and their cooperation, and to Palmerston North City Environmental Trust for some funding for advertising. We have apologies from Mark Pearce, from Chris Mackenzie, and from Adrian Rahui, and from Jack, as I said, for lateness. So the themes are the environment and the needs of children. And to chair the event, I'm pleased to introduce Barbara Arnold. Many of you will know Barbara. She's a science educator at Tamanawa. She's part of many other community activities, including Forest and Bird and the Royal Society, and she's eminently suited to guide us during this afternoon. So Barbara will explain the format of our meeting, and so I'll hand over to Barbara.
I'm the teacher, so I get to see the late notes. What we're going to do first is that each of the candidates will get 1 minute to introduce themselves. And these are randomly ordered, so we might start by taking a roll, just to make sure we've got everybody that's supposed to be here. And then there are 2 questions. We're going to take 1 question at a time so that people don't get diverted. The questions will be up on the screen. The first question is about the environment. The second one is about children and young people. The candidates will have 2 minutes to answer that. The timekeeper over here will give a 30-second warning when it's time. And regrettably, this is not the United Nations, where after you've had the warning thing and you run out of time, the light goes red and the sound goes off. The candidates can come and stand here where there is sound. We decided that was a bit easier than trying to run around with a microphone up and down, up and down. After everybody's had their 2 minutes on each of those 2 questions, so that's a total of 4 minutes, then there will be questions from the audience. We'll explain more about that when we get to it. Okay, so first to introduce themselves is Darroch from New Zealand First, standing for Palmerston North.
Well, I've got 1 minute, and it's obviously that's not a lot of time, but my name is Darroch. I'm standing for New Zealand First here in Palmerston North. For those who don't know me, I was born and raised in Auckland. I've been in Palmerston North for about 4 or 5 years, and I've been involved in the New Zealand First Party for about that long as well. I'm the current Vice President of the party itself. I'm a secondary school science teacher. I'm on the Board of Trustees of a local primary school. I have worked with youth in the community for a year in between my 7-year service in our army as a commissioned officer and going back to university to get my graduate diploma in teaching. Added to all of that wrapped up, I'm a solo father. I have been on the sole parents benefit and I have worked off that. So I know what it's like to struggle in the community and the environment that we are in today. I know what it's like to work hard, and I know what it's like to serve our country.
Yes, it was.
Thank you very much.
A minute goes very quickly. Second is Roy Brown from the Conservative Party.
All right, good afternoon everyone. My name is Roy Brown. I'm representing the Conservative Party in the Rangitikei electorate, and I've got to say it's a great electorate, and I actually live there with my wife and 3 daughters. I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old and a 7-week-old, which means I'm not getting much sleep at the moment, so it's a lot of fun. But we love living in Fielding, and I work as a manager for an energy company. I became involved with the party 3 years ago when we formed it. Colin Craig, the leader of the party, and myself have known each other for over 20 years. We're very good friends, and we're very committed to our country and also the Rangitikei, and we really want to make a difference. So look forward to telling you more about the Conservative Party. Thank you.
Number 3, Pani Farvid from Internet Mana.
Thank you. Hi everyone. It's lovely to be here and get the opportunity to talk to you today, and I see a lot of familiar faces from some of the other meetings that we've been going to, so that's nice. Hey, I'm a Internet Party candidate for Palmerston North, but I'm here campaigning for your party Vote for Internet Mana. And I'm an academic by trade. I work at a university and I research and teach in the area of psychology, social justice and gender equality. I just wanted to tell you very quickly some of the reasons why I was attracted to joining Internet Party. It's because of its extremely progressive stance in how we should govern in New Zealand. We want to bring in a government that's truly responsive to its people, that carries out democratic processes from the micro level, people-driven democratic processes, like the way that we currently write our policy. We have a policy forum and a policy incubator where our members and the rest of the public can have input onto how we should be running New Zealand. We want to be for the people and not for the corporates or for profit. Thanks.
Number 4, Iain Lees-Galloway, representing Labour. I should have said that, sorry.
Good afternoon everybody, thank you very much for coming along. I'm Iain Lees-Galloway, I'm the Member of Parliament for Palmerston North. I'm Labour's Junior Whip, ACC spokesperson and Associate Health spokesperson, and I'm a member of the Health Select Committee in Parliament. Look, I'm in politics because I want my children, my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren to have the same opportunities or better than I had. I want them to have an environment that sustains their life, that's somewhere that sustains the economy for them and is a great place where they can live and work and play. I want my children to be able to afford their own home. I want my great-grandchildren to be able to go out there and get a job when they leave university. I want everybody in those future generations to be able to do everything that I took for granted. I want my children to be able to send their children to their local school without having to worry about the competition of getting into a charter school or a private school. I simply want what everybody wants. I want the future generations to have work, I want them to have a home, and I want their family to be well taken care of in an environment that sustains their well-being.
Next is Iain McKelvie from the National Party.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for taking a little bit of your Sunday afternoon off to come and listen to us. I'm Iain McKelvie. It's been my privilege to represent the Rangitikei electorate in Parliament for the last 3 years in a government that I think has done an extraordinary job in extremely difficult and challenging times. I am a member of the Law and Order Select Committee, the Primary Production Select Committee, the Regulations Review Committee, and it took me a little while to find my way around Parliament. Having found my way around Parliament, I'm now confident that I can represent the people of the Rangitikei in a manner that I think is appropriate and a true, I guess, representation of rural New Zealand. And I realise that I'm sitting in the middle of I guess, the metropolitan centre of the Rangitikei electorate right now, but the most challenged part of my electorate is a long way from here, and the challenges are caused by their distance from here. So that's really my aspiration, and I guess my other aspiration is to create a country that we all can live, work and play in for the future. Thank you.
And now I'd ask Jack McDonald from the Green Party to introduce himself.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Very sorry for turning up late today. I just came from Wellington to the Radio New Zealand debate, but it's a pleasure to be with you today. So I'm the Green Party candidate for Te Tai Hauauru, the Māori electorate that encompasses all of Palmerston North and Rangitikei. And we're campaigning in this election on 3 core priorities, and that's a fairer society, a smarter economy, and a cleaner environment. We're campaigning for the party vote to be able to deliver on these priorities, regardless of whether we're in government or whether we're in opposition. We've proven that we can work across the political spectrum to achieve our policy priorities. We are campaigning, however, to change the government, because we know that National has put our environment and our children at serious risk, and they will continue to do so if we allow them to govern for another 3 years. So a party vote for the Greens is a vote for every child in Aotearoa New Zealand to be able to thrive without the hindrance of poverty. A party vote for the Greens is a vote for a cleaner environment. A party vote for the Greens is a vote for a smarter economy with good jobs for all New Zealanders and a strong regional development strategy for places here like Palmerston North. Kia ora koutou katoa.
Next is Jono Naylor from the National Party.
A very good afternoon to you all, and again thank you for coming out this evening. My name, as you heard, is Jono Naylor. I am here representing the National Party. I've spent the last 25 years working in this community in all sorts of realms. I've been a youth worker, a social worker, health education and all sorts of different things, as well of course in local government as a councillor and as your mayor. My resolve remains the same. I'm committed to this community, I'm committed to this country, and I have a passion about seeing things fulfil their potential, and that's what it's all about for me. It's about this country fulfilling its potential. It's about us making the most of what we can do. And so it's about building a bigger, better and stronger economy. It's about supporting families, supporting our local communities, improving health comes in responsibly managing our environment. So those are the things I'm committed to, and I've been committed to them for a long time, and I'll continue to do that should I be able to be your MP for Palmerston North. Thank you.
And now Romuald Rudzki from New Zealand First.
Good afternoon everybody, I'm Romuald Rudzki. As you can tell from the accent, I'm an immigrant. I came to New Zealand 14 years ago. We used to live on Te Awi. We now live at a country on the Paetua track. I live with my wife, my son and my father-in-law, and a sheepdog that's going deaf. We know he's going deaf because he barks more than he used to. The reason I'm standing for New Zealand First is because I think this is a time and this is an opportunity for you to decide the future of this wonderful country. The country that attracts so many immigrants because it is God's own country. And the opportunity in this election is to decide what kind of country you want in the next 3 years, the next 30 years, and probably the next 300 years.
And I expect by now that Deborah Russell knows that she's next. Deborah Russell from Labour Party.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, thank you for coming. I'm a member of the Labour Party because I believe in real substantial freedom of opportunity, real substantial equality. Not the sort of thin sort that is just, no rules or what you can do. It's actually the sort of enabling opportunity and enabling equality of opportunity. That means making sure that kids get a decent education. It means making sure we've got health care for people. It means making sure that people can put food on the table, that they have a warm, dry home to live in. It's all about giving people the security so that they can stand tall, look each other in the eye and treat each other as equals. That's what the Labour Party believes in. It's what I believe in. A little bit about me. I'm married with kids. I'm an expert in taxation. I lecture up here at Massey University, and I've lived in this part of the country for a long time, and I will do my best to represent you when I become the Member of Parliament for Rangitikei.
Thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. So we've now got a starting point. We're going to move now to the first question. Is it going to come up? Brilliant. Okay, so as you can see, I don't need to read it out to you. You can read it for yourselves. and the candidates have been given the question in advance so that they are prepared. They will have 2 minutes to answer this question, the first one. Again, they've been put in a different random order. How many random orders can you get? And there will be a 30-second warning this time. At the end of 30 seconds, and the second bell, I will step up behind you. Okay, starting with Iain Lees-Galloway.
So, Deborah and I work as a team, so we're going to split this question up between the two of us. I'm going to talk about 2 separate subjects. I'm going to talk about fresh water, and Deborah's going to talk about climate change. So, we have a clear aspiration for what we want to happen with freshwater and water management over the next 20 years. We want to make our rivers and lakes swimmable within a generation. And at the core of achieving that is what we call national policy statements. These are frameworks that that the RMA, the Resource Management Act, allows governments to put into place that set standard rules across the country about how you want to manage your environment, and we want to introduce a considerably stronger national policy statement for freshwater than what we have right now. In fact, the last Labor government initiated an NPS for freshwater management, and the resulting statement from a tribunal chaired by the former Principal Environment Judge Shepherd would have required strong action on the impact of agricultural intensification is having on our water quality. Unfortunately, that wasn't implemented. National came along and gutted the NPS, and now what we have is a national policy statement that allows for levels of nutrients in our water that are toxic, that allows for our rivers to become dirtier, and sets a standard only of rivers and lakes being wadable or boatable. So in other words, minimum human contact with our fresh water would be allowed under the current scheme. We need to do much better than that. We need to ensure that our fresh water that is clean now stays clean. We cannot dirty any more rivers than we already have. We need to control irrigation, and we'll do that through a resource rental so that irrigation is done in a more sustainable and sensible way, and the revenue gained from that resource rental will be used to clean up our rivers. And we need to make sure that farming is supported to move to practices which are more sustainable and have less impact on our land and our water.
Now, Darroch Ball from New Zealand First will address the question.
New Zealand First has had a founding principle that wise governments view the preservation and enhancement of the environment as sound economics. Our environment is our economy. Our brand is 100% clean and green, and we must ensure that we keep it that way, not just for the sake of the economy, but for the sake of the next generation. Having a clean environment is a unique gift in our world, and being able to ensure it remains that way whilst ensuring our economy moves forward is as essential as it is that the environment becomes integral to how our economy works. There is no room for prioritising the economy over environment, or even the environment over the economy. It is a realism that they must complement each other in order to succeed, and we can do this. My aspirations for the environment is to ensure that it remains an asset to us, that we continue to utilise new technology in production of power, pollution prevention, and improve our environment, but advance our economic productivity in the long run. The Labour and Greens Party plan to have clean, swimmable rivers as a goal that I don't think anyone could deny we all want. And if we can achieve this in a viable and affordable, balanced way, then we should all strive to make that happen. The conservation of our country's natural and cultural heritage has international significance and is our party's priority. While our environment is envied internationally as clean, green and attractive, the image hides a number of serious environmental problems which need to be addressed. These include pollution of streams and rivers, excessive water extractions from rivers in some regions, rehabilitation of erosion-prone land, and protection of environments that are habitats for endangered species. 100% pure must not be empty words, but must be backed by effective and enforceable environmental protection policies. Specifically, we would scrap the ETS. Profitability on our environment needs to stop. We need to make sure developers are responsible to the community, and we need to ensure we concentrate on cleaning our waterways. by ensuring all stakeholders commit to the progress and process by which the needs of local industry coincide with the needs of the local government. Thank you.
Deborah.
When my eldest daughter was born, I had an experience which I'm sure is very familiar to many parents, especially new mothers in those first emotional few weeks. I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? Bringing a child into this world where we are so threatened by climate change. And then I thought, it's done now, so I'm going to fix the problem. And that's part of what we're going to do in the Labour Party. We are committed to doing something about climate change. Climate change is a real and present danger. So in the last few weeks we've had news of methane plumes in the Arctic, bubbles of methane getting up to the surface. That's a critical danger to us. We need to act on climate change now. And don't let anyone tell you it isn't real. It is real, all right? That's the overwhelming consensus of scientists. It's actually a real and present threat. So what is the Labour Party going to do about it? Well, first of all, we're going to fix the emissions trading scheme. It went wrong because the national government allowed the import of cheap overseas units. All right, so you could buy cheap overseas units. That meant the market here collapsed on the emissions trading scheme. It effectively gutted the ETS. We're going to change that back. We were going to halt the import of these cheap overseas units. It's a technical change, but believe me, it will make a difference. We're going to include agriculture in the ETS. We know we need to take it gently, but it needs to be done. We can no longer ignore the fact that one of our biggest industries is also one of the biggest contributors to climate change from our country. We need to fix that, not just pretend it won't happen. In the Labour Party, we are committed to a low carbon future. That means renewable energy, it means clean, affordable energy, green energy. It's a low carbon future. We actually must start moving towards it. So we'll be looking to support renewable energy. Above all, in the Labour Party, we are committed to doing our bit. Sure, on a world scale, New Zealand doesn't produce much in the way of carbon emissions, but per capita we do, and we cannot close our eyes, block our ears, pretend it's not happening. It is, it's real, and we are committed to doing something about it.
And now Roy Brown from the Conservative Party.
Okay, look, the Conservative Party is committed to four things, and I'll add a fifth as well, but the first one is fertile soil. We are committed to the responsible stewardship of our soil, ensuring that it is fertile, free from toxins, and productive both now and into the future. The second one is drinkable water. We are committed to investigating and implementing reasonable and affordable steps to ensure that our rivers and our waterways are free from pollution and continue to nourish and be enjoyed by all New Zealanders. The third one is breathable air. We want to ensure that our country has clean, breathable air, and obviously that's going to ensure the health and well-being of all New Zealanders. The fourth one is thriving oceans. We're committed to ensuring that the oceans that surround our country and everything in them are looked after and sustainably managed. Fifthly, and this is my point, we will want to get rid of the emissions trading scheme. We believe it's a nonsense tax and we want to scrap it and get rid of it. That will save you costs on your groceries, your petrol and your electricity. So we do want to get rid of the ETS. Finally, we want to clean up the pollution in New Zealand's lakes, rivers and aquifers by working towards the aim of having fences or borders put in place where waterways are adjacent to agricultural and horticultural land. We would also like to seek to improve the control and spread of destructive weeds and pests on farms, forestry and conservation land to protect the environment and obviously New Zealand's economy. Thank you.
Come on up. Romuald Rudzki.
Thanks, Barbara. When New Zealand First was founded in 1993, one of its 15 founding principles was about the environment. So I bet you didn't know how green New Zealand First credentials are. The principle from 21 years ago reads, wise governments view the preservation and enhancement of the environment as sound economics. All environmental policies will be proactive with a view to creating employment and sustainable wealth whilst improving one of our few competitive advantages. These are not just fluffy words. As in our manifesto for this election, we have 8 pages of very common sense policies on the environment, including conservation, climate change, genetically modified organisms, coastal and oceans policy, sustainable oceans, maritime law, water use, and a national water use strategy, which will include wild and scenic rivers. It's important to voice New Zealand's first position as stated in the 2014 manifesto, which is, while our environment is envied internationally as clean, green and attractive, the image hides a number of serious environmental problems which need to be addressed. These include pollution of streams and rivers and excessive water extraction from rivers in some regions, rehabilitation of erosion-prone land and so forth. I'll just mention 2 policies. 1, New Zealand First will provide and promote conservation authorities with the necessary resources and legislative framework to ensure the protection of the environment. And 2, New Zealand First will support threatened species recovery programs and protection and restoration of the habitat. So remember, we were green before anybody else was. Thank you.
So now we're going to hear from Jack McDonald from the Green Party.
Kia ora anō tātou. So in this election, one of our core priorities is for a cleaner environment, and within that there are a number of priorities that we want to address. The first is, and probably the most important, at least at this election, is to ensure that all of our rivers are clean enough to swim in again. We also want to ensure that our beaches are safe from oil spills, and we want to ensure that we do our bit as a global citizen to reduce our climate emissions and take a lead on the global stage. So I want to first focus on river quality. We've put water quality on the political agenda over the last few elections, and you know, it's really good to hear Labour adopt almost our entire policy platform, listening to what Iain was saying, and that's really positive because we want to achieve clean rivers. However, I must ask, why didn't they not do something about it in the last 9 years that they were in government? That's a legitimate question. However, our campaigning on this issue has forced them to take a strong position, and it has forced National to take a weak position. So this proves how the Greens make change. We work across the political spectrum and we influence policy across the political spectrum. So our plan to make our rivers clean enough to swim again includes a strong national standard on water to ensure that all rivers are clean enough to swim again. It includes supporting farmers with a $1 million fund for riparian planting, and it includes banning new dams on our wild rivers. I want to move on to deep sea oil drilling. We'll ban deep sea oil drilling and ensure that our beaches are clean enough to swim in again. That also will ensure that we don't exacerbate the climate change problem. And on climate change, we're proposing getting rid of the ETS as well, but we want to institute a carbon tax. Now that carbon tax is actually going to go back into families and into business. So no families or no businesses will be worse off because we're going to reduce the company tax rate by 1% and institute a $2,000 free tax threshold for families. So all of that money is going to go into families, and they're actually going to be about $300 better off. So at this election, a party vote for the Greens is the only vote that's going to ensure that we have a cleaner environment, and we'll achieve that regardless of whether we're in government or in opposition.
Now Jono Naylor from the National Party.
Thank you. How do you cram all this into 2 minutes? Well, here goes. I guess for me there's 3 main priorities that I have when it comes to the environment. The first is that we safeguard what we have already got so that future generations can enjoy it. The second is that we steadily improve where things have deteriorated. And third priority for me is protecting our endangered and iconic species. So this government is the first government to have ever established national freshwater standards, and we are committed to ensuring that our waterways do not deteriorate any further, and that's been a really big push for us and something that we are committed to doing. Also, when we're talking about steadily improving things that have deteriorated, we already invested a significant amount of money into river cleanups. Our own Manawatu River received $5 million in government funding that leveraged a whole lot of other support from other places as well, and has started to see some demonstrable effects in the Manawatu River, and I've been really proud to have been associated with that Manawatu River Leaders Accord. The other thing that we're trying to do, I guess, is also to protect our endangered and iconic species. And so for that purpose, we have increased the size of the marine reserve for Maui's dolphins. We've engaged in one of the largest battles for our birds in a long, long time to eradicate predators, and that's going to be rolled out over the next little while, and we'll see preservation of our native birds and others. And also we've invested in the Wild-Based Recovery Centre through the Department of Conservation, and I aim to twist the Minister's arm to see if he'll contribute some more for that as well. But I think the important thing about environment issues and the solutions that they're based on good science, and they are evidence-based and not emotionally based. It's important also to have realistic and achievable goals so that everyone shares in the commitment that we're making to ensure that we do achieve very good environmental outcomes for our country.
Now Pani Farvid from Internet Mana.
Hi again. So the Internet Party and the Internet Mana partnership calls for an urgent action to protect New Zealand's environment and build a clean, sustainable economy and future for us. We've set a goal of 100% electricity generated from renewable resources by 2025. We will appoint a multidisciplinary panel to make the economic case for this and set the plans in motion to achieve it as soon as possible. We will aim for 100% carbon neutrality by 2050. In principle, we support the Green Party's climate protection plan when it comes to replacing the emissions trading scheme with an emissions levy. We want to become a world leader in green technologies within 5 years. To support this, we will invest in research and development and green tech innovation. Linkages between academia, research centres and businesses and primary producers will be strengthened. We will develop a futuristic, global scale green data centre in New Zealand and tackle e-waste issues while boosting smart cities, smart homes and smarter transport. We will focus on biodiversity. We want to prioritise river cleanups and water quality all over New Zealand, but obviously specifically in the Manawatu region. And most importantly, I believe, what I believe is most important is we will impose an immediate moratorium on hydraulic fracturing, deep sea exploration, undersea mining, and deep well injections until the recommendations for the Commissioner of the Environment about these environmentally risky practices are debated publicly and acted on by the government. We need to come to embody a 100% pure image, which we're not actually living up to right now. Thank you.
And the last speaker this time round is Iain McKelvie from the National Party.
Quite hazardous getting off that stage. I think when you look at these two questions that we're answering this afternoon, I had intended to answer them both together, but I clearly don't have that opportunity, so I'm going to change my tack a little. I want to just talk about a couple of things. One, the ETS, I want to initially talk about that. The national government firmly believe we need to be involved in the ETS, and we need to continue that. And the reason we need to do that is because we are a trading country, we're involved internationally, and we need to involve ourselves with all sorts of international factors, and I think it's very important that we remain in that. At what level we remain in it, of course, is another matter, and that's a very important matter for New Zealand because, as I said, we're a trading country and we contribute in a very small way to the total carbon issues of the world. The national government has a great record in this field, and I think we've been there for some considerable time. Our Blue-Greens branch was formed in about 1991 by Nick Smith, who is still, I guess, convenient or has been convenient. And in the last term of government, we've insulated over 300,000 homes. We've created a record number of marine reserves. We've cleaned up our rivers and lakes significantly, and our very own Manawatu and the Lake Horowhenua, 2 examples nearby where with significant efforts going into. Build a nationwide network of cycleways, and that's our aspiration, another 100 million going into urban cycleways in the next term of government, should we be re-elected. Ban shark finning, increasing protection significantly of whales and dolphins. We've spent $100 billion to reduce waste in our communities. We're introducing independent environmental reporting, and we've increased renewable energy to 90%, or aiming to increase renewable energy to 90% by 2025. Pretty significant record the national government has in the environmental field. Of course, I'm a farmer and well appreciate the challenges we have to our country. We must remember as we go through this environmental planning that in excess of 70% of our income comes from agriculture. Thank you.
You're doing a wonderful job of keeping to time, people. Thank you very much. So now we're going to start on question 2, which is this one. Aspirations for children and young people. So again, we're going to give the speakers each a turn in a different random order. How many random orders can you get? And 2 minutes again to address this question. And we'll begin at this time with Jono Naylor from the National Party.
Hopefully we can stick to random order rather than random answers. But look, my whole reason for getting involved in politics, whether it be at central government level or local government level, has always been about ensuring a positive future for this generation and the next and the next and the next. And what that's about for me is about them having more choices, more freedom, more power over their own destiny. And to achieve this, we've got to build an environment that creates a strong economy and creates more jobs, and we're continuing to do that. We're continuing to make critical changes in our social welfare, education, health and justice to build those opportunities, and we're delivering better public services over this last term of government as one of our priorities. Now, New Zealand is one of 6 developed countries in the world where inequality is stabilised or is improving, and over the past year, 3%, poverty has decreased by 3%. Now that is nowhere near good enough, but we are starting to make some inroads in the right direction. And so that's why, on top of free breakfast to all schools who want it, having social work services to all decile 1 to 3 schools, over warming up nearly 300,000 homes, we have in this year's budget also allocated another $500 million over 4 years in services and support to families. It's important that kids have a good start to life, and education is one of the absolute keys to this. We've doubled the spending on early childhood education up to $1.5 billion. We've made sure that more children from low-income families are getting involved in early childhood education so that they're ready to start at school on the right foot. And we've set positive, good targets for school achievement. Our Level 2 NCEA achievement is up around 20% for Māori and Pacifica students and 10% overall. I want great things for my kids, for their kids and my kids' kids' kids and everybody to come, and it's only when we start investing in those things around education and jobs for them that we're going to see some impact. We've been doing that till now, and it's our aim to continue to do that.
Darroch Hall from New Zealand First.
I'm passionate about the youth and young people. I'm a secondary school teacher, and I have worked with youth in the community, and I am a father of a 12-year-old who is soon to be a teenager, and I'm looking forward to that. It is our responsibility as parents to ensure our kids have the best education that they can get, that they live in a safe society, a productive society, and a society that is free from influences that attack our social fabric. Our kids have one chance of growing up right and in the right environment, and we have the responsibility to ensure that they get that. We cannot underestimate the importance of protecting the future pathways of our children. That means we must continue to fight to protect our social fabric and traditional family values which underpin our society. This includes opposing the liberalisation of laws relating to issues such as prostitution, cannabis and other drug use. It means ensuring we curb the damaging effect that alcohol has on our youth and young people. Our youth have a hard road ahead of them in the world today, and unfortunately today our systems are not helping our youth and young people as much as they should. With 1 in 4 in poverty, 54,000 under 24-year-olds unemployed, student debt skyrocketing, a lack of jobs with first world wages, houses so unaffordable they are out of touch for most young families and just trying to get into their first home. It is important that we not focus on what is holding us back and we look forward at how we will support our youth into the future. But the facts are stark. And unless we have a government that not only properly addresses those issues, but actually faces the facts and accepts that those issues have solutions, our youth will continue to struggle and stumble at the hurdles they face. Not because they are empathetic towards their future, but because we have failed them and we have failed to support them where they need it the most. We need to ensure our youth have genuine and productive pathways forward. We need to ensure they are safe and that they are protected. Ensure that the support organisations and mechanisms are adequately funded. And we need to ensure that they have access to affordable homes, first world wages and healthy choices.
Now Deborah Russell from the Labour Party.
As Iain said before, we work as a team, so I'm going to talk about some of our early childhood stuff. I have 3 beautiful teenage daughters, very precious to me. And they arrived in this world as little bundles of hope for the future, as all children do. And yet we knock it out of far too many of them. There are 285,000 children in this country living in poverty. Now, you might quibble about how you measure that, but no matter what, there are far too many children growing up in poor homes. One really tangible measure of that is that we have the lowest rate of home ownership in New Zealand for the last 50 years, right now. And that's because of our growing income equality, our growing inequality in this country. And that all leads to children just not having the start they need. You know, there are kids who arrive at school these days. Some of them aren't toilet trained, some of them don't know which way to hold a book. They don't have some of those basics. We want to start fixing some of that. First thing we're going to do, we've got our Best Start package. What that means is that in the first year of a baby's life, if you're not getting paid parental leave, then you will get $60 a week. This is based on solid neurological research. We know that children who grow up in stressed environments have real problems with brain development later on because of the stress they experience all the time. Our $60 a week will relieve that stress a little. That Best Start payment will carry on for low-income families for the next until a child is of 3 years of age. There's a small continuing payment for that. That's all designed to make sure that we relieve that stress. We're going to make sure that every child has access to really good quality early childhood education of whatever form. Be 25 hours free a week for early childhood education. That makes sure that some of those kids do arrive at school knowing how to pick up a book. We're going to have free doctor's visits for under 13-year-olds. We know if we can get kids to the doctor faster, they get better faster. It's the best thing to do. And you know what? We've got it all booked and paid for in a fully balanced budget. We can afford to do this and we will do it.
And now we're going to hear from Jack McDonald from the Green Party.
As a 21-year-old, the reason I'm standing for Parliament is because the voices of young people have been shut out of the political process and our voices are not heard in the political discourse whatsoever. And so it's really important that young people do stand up, because particularly for those of us who are politically engaged. However, I want to focus this contribution on on our plan to ensure that every child in Aotearoa has enough to thrive. So, as Deborah said, we have 285,000 children living in poverty at this time. Now we have to think about the human cost of that. That's 285,000 children who might not have enough food for breakfast or lunch, might not have enough to have shoes and raincoats, and 35,000 more children are in severe poverty under this government, and they tried to hide that fact by fudging the figures. So how are we going to address this? Well, the Green Party's costed plan, and by the way, we're the only party with a costed budget that's been independently reviewed. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to universalise the Working for Families payment so that those in the lowest incomes have access to that. We're going to extend the early childhood subsidy to all 2-year-olds. That will benefit thousands of families who have 2-year-olds in early childhood care currently. We're going to invest in education. We want to make schools as hubs of the community, so that's going to include a national school lunch fund, that's going to include free after school care and holiday care. That's going to include dedicated school hub coordinators, which will be social workers in all 1 to 4 decile schools. Jono mentioned that they've got social workers. They don't actually have to cover all of the schools, and it's really not adequate at the current time. So the Green Party's plan is it costs $1 billion. We're going to pay for that by instituting a new top tax rate on all those who earn above $140,000. It's only 3% of the population. They should pay their fair share so that we can eliminate child poverty in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and they can all have a future that we can be proud of. Kia ora.
Pani Farvid from Internet Mana.
Thank you. So the Internet Party itself is a youth-based political movement. About 40% of our candidates themselves are under 30. I'm 33 and I'm kind of getting up there in terms of age in this party, which is quite kind of weird. Anyway, and all of our members are quite young also, and one of the core goals of the Internet Party and the Internet Mana Alliance is to get young people voting and to get young people involved in the political process. So when it comes to children and young people, we want to end child poverty. No child should go cold hungry or live in substandard housing in New Zealand. We are not a poor nation, and it's absolutely abhorrent that this happens on a daily basis. We'll carry out a review and modification of the welfare system. We will build 30,000 new state rental homes within the first year of being in Parliament. We will feed the 100,000 kids that go to school hungry every day with a breakfast and lunch program that's subsidised by the government at the cost of $50 million a year, which is really nothing when you think about it. We said we will set a goal of 0% unemployment for under 25s. The current economic strategy reached its limits to provide full employment more than 30 years ago. The Internet Party believes we need a whole economic transformation where New Zealand becomes the global leader in digital economy and innovation. We will support this through education, apprenticeships, innovation, research and development, self-start entrepreneurships with communities, and invest $1 billion each year to fund approximately 100,000 jobs when there are no jobs available. We will also make tertiary education free. This is not just a pipe dream, it's fully costed and absolutely possible. It's about priorities, not about the money. It will cost about $1.4 billion, the exact same amount as the national tax cuts in 2010 that were given to the rich. So we believe we can live in a society where our children and young people become the priority again, rather than the ones who are starting on the back foot. Thank you.
Iain Lees-Galloway from Labour.
We're very well trained. So I want to leap forward from early childhood to what we're going to do for young people, and our goal is for every young person under the age of 20 to be either earning or learning. So for those who have left school but aren't in tertiary education, we want to encourage more apprenticeships, and one of the ways that we plan to do that is to subsidise apprentice wages in their first year of an apprenticeship if they've been on the dole. We'll simply take the money that they're receiving on the dole and give that to an employer if they take them on into an apprenticeship. And actually most employers I talk to say if we could give them some help with that first year of taking on a young person, that would make them far more likely to take someone on. We also want to diversify the range of apprenticeships that are available. And in our digital upgrade, we talk about digital apprenticeships, encouraging young people into the technological based industries, because that diversifying into those areas is certainly going to offer a lot of opportunities for young people in the future. The other area, and this is pertinent since we've been talking about conservation and environment today, is conservation cadetships, where we want to encourage young people who are interested in conservation and environmental management into apprenticeship type work that gives them the opportunity to learn the skills they need to move into those areas as well. For those who are in tertiary education, look, we need to actually go back to the drawing board a bit with tertiary education. It starts right at the top with the Tertiary Education Commission, which has gone a long way from its original mandate, which was to create a more collaborative and constructive tertiary education sector. But we also want to review student loans and allowances. There's been a lot of tinkering over the last few years. Labor tried to make it better for students. National's taken a lot of things away from students. We actually think we need to get back to a structure that encourages young people to get into tertiary education and to make sure they're well supported when they get in there. We think that through that combination of supporting work for young people and education for young people, we can create a better future for our next generations.
Roy Brown from the Conservative Party.
All right, look, the Conservative Party is absolutely committed to the family and protecting the family unit, and we believe that the family unit is a vital building block of our society, and we're committed to stemming the governmental degradation of this unit. We will introduce family-friendly policies aimed to strengthen, promote and rebuild the place of this pillar of our society. We also want to ensure that our education system works for all New Zealand children. To ensure this happens, we believe that funding should follow the child. We recognise that not all children are the same, and parents need more choice around the education of their children. We also believe that this would create a more equitable system for education providers and would ensure that providers get the funding they need for the children that they are educating. We want to see resourcing schools to better identify and help children with learning difficulties or specialist needs. Many children are not having their needs met early enough and are at a disadvantage as a result of this. We propose that screening happen as early as possible to ensure that provisions can be made to ensure that all children have the optimum environment in which to learn. We also want to get or scrap the permanent removal of all legal highs. We want to get rid of those. We believe that they are very, very harmful to our community. Law and order, we want to look at protecting our children at home and ensuring that all New Zealanders feel safe in their homes. And finally, we want to increase the minimum legal drinking age to 20 and increasing the excise tax on alcohol and introducing minimum pricing so that significant social costs are addressed. Thank you.
The next speaker is Iain McKelvie from the National Party.
So I said earlier that I thought these two questions ran hand in hand with each other, because clearly without a very positive and I guess to some extent pristine environment, we can't help and assist our young to have a better life in New Zealand. However, I want to just clear up a couple of myths first. One is that this government's policy already has implemented free doctors' visits for under 13-year-olds. And the second one is that one of the stated aims of the Ministry for Social Development is that every young person will be in work or education. So those are clearly policies of the National Party, have been for some time. Politics for me is about giving everyone a chance in this best little country, in the best little country in the world. It's all about people. Our teachers, our health workers, our truck drivers, our farmers, our farm workers, our council workers, everybody who goes to work in the morning are the people that make and pay for what happens in New Zealand. So it's the people that work for New Zealand on a daily basis, go out there and slave themselves away. They pay for every bill we pay in this country. Our solution for our young is certainly not to throw money at the problem. Our solution is to give those people a better education, a better opportunity in life, let their parents or their mothers or their fathers or their caregivers have a much better opportunity to bring those children up in an environment that ensures they get the benefits that most of us of my generation had in New Zealand. It's quite a challenge for us, and it's a challenge for New Zealand because as we go through these economic cycles, we find that we get tested, particularly in the northern part of my electorate. And if you look at the northern part of the Rangitikei electorate, we are really challenged for jobs, as the jobs almost entirely come out of the agricultural sector and the tourism sector, both of which rely heavily on the environment, in fact rely totally on the environment for their futures. So this government, I think, has done a great job under extremely testing circumstances in dealing with our young and with our challenges in New Zealand. Thank you.
Thanks. New Zealand First has always advocated for young children and young people, including being the only party to have raised the national minimum wage by $3 in 3 years, when it went from $9 to $12. We were also the first to introduce free health visits for children under 6. Our current proposals for change include policies in health, education, housing and employment. The most important thing is to ensure children's health and well-being, which is why New Zealand First is the only party proposing to remove GST off food and domestic rates, which will place more money into the hands of parents and caregivers. It is completely unacceptable that child poverty and the working poor are struggling in what some call the rock star economy. Even the most eccentric rock stars look after their kids. Just look at Ozzy Osbourne with Sharon and their 3 children. Who can name them? There's Jack Osbourne, Kelly Osbourne, and the third one who doesn't want to be famous. That's why she doesn't appear on any of the programmes. That's why New Zealand First has to say about children, we must accept that health outcomes are a defining feature of our first world status. Where once New Zealand was in the first 5 countries in the OECD, we are now in a much inferior position, in the bottom third for infant mortality, and we are busily importing third world diseases such as rheumatic fever. Let me mention just 2 of our common sense policies. New Zealand First will therefore continue to focus on family health, and particularly early intervention by expanding such programmes as Family Start and home-based support. Secondly, we'll also introduce the Teen Health Check Bill to require district health boards to make provisions for health checks on all Year 9 students, and other measures to ensure that no young person enters secondary school with health problems likely to be a barrier to their learning.
Thank you very much to each of you for taking the time to give us your viewpoints on these 2 questions. We're going to now put you in the hot seat. Now the format will be that there is now opportunity for the audience to ask questions of the candidates.
I'll have to ask a question before I walk around.
Well, we must explain what's going to happen first. Audrey's got the microphone. Seeing she's got the microphone, she's going to be first with a question by the sound of it. Then when she's asked her question, she might pass it to somebody else to answer theirs, and I'll point you in the right direction. If you could put your hand up and ask your question, that would be really cool. If you've got a specific candidate to ask, that would be excellent, because as you'll appreciate, it takes a little while for everybody to answer. The candidates will have a minute, and you've discovered that a minute's not very long. Short and to the point. So,
Will they come up to answer?
no, we're going to pass them the microphone. At this point, I get to hog this microphone and you get to share this one.
To share the one I've got?
Yes.
Okay. All right, my question was this: more than one person has mentioned the damaging effect of alcohol on young people. Only one person, as far as I'm aware, mentioned anything that they would actually do about it, except they would fix it. But that's easier said than done. So could we have comments from those who have ideas of what they were to do? And if you haven't thought about this, don't take up the time.
I'll just hand my minute over to Iain, so you have 2 minutes.
Oh, it's worth a try. Look, I've had a bit to do with this because I was Labour's Associate Health Spokesperson, still am Labour's Associate Health Spokesperson responsible for alcohol and drugs. And look, when the Law Commission did its report, which was initiated by the Labour government, came up with a huge number of recommendations. When we originally got them started, we asked them to draft legislation that would be close to those recommendations. National said, no, we don't want that legislation, thank you very much. We want to write our own, which was incredibly weak. And I must say that my record is really strong on this. I voted for just about every single amendment to that legislation that would have strengthened it. There are a few things that can be done. First of all, lowering the drink drive limit has a huge impact on our attitude towards alcohol, and I'm really pleased that when my bill was drawn, the government finally acted on that. Other things are raising minimum price. Age is an issue, but it's like taking water out of a bucket with a teaspoon. Advertising is another thing that we need to tackle, especially the sponsorship of sports teams through alcohol. So those are the kinds of things that I'm determined to work on, and believe me, that's in our policy.
Like Iain, the Green Party was very disappointed that the government didn't implement the recommendations of the Law Commission. The alcohol reform bill didn't go far enough, and that was universally acknowledged across the sector and the general public. So what we would do, we would prohibit alcohol advertising in all media. We would work towards no alcohol advertising at sports events. We would go further than main parties. We don't think that that free healthcare should stop at 13. We think it should stop at 18, because actually young people need access to health services. And one-stop shops, like in my area in Kapiti Youth Support, are at threat of having to shut down because the government won't secure their funding. What else? Well, I don't think we should scapegoat legal adults at the age of 18 by putting this on them. This is a societal-wide binge drinking culture, and we need to work as a society with holistic approaches to reduce binge drinking, not scapegoat young people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
New Zealand itself has a very big problem with binge drinking and alcohol, and especially with youth and young people. Unfortunately, they do have a big problem with it. New Zealand First is for promoting the drinking age to raise up to 20. We definitely want to have a look at a review of the cost of the alcohol. At the moment you can buy ready drinks that are cheaper than water, and it's unacceptable. And third, we've actually got a policy out this election that if you are binge drinking and are so drunk and intoxicated that you are a danger to yourself or someone else in the public, that is an arrestable offence, and you will be dealt with.
Pani, what's next?
We also believe the recommendations that were made by the Law Commission should be acted on, and it was very disappointing that that didn't happen. As a psychologist, what I find really frustrating is the mixed messages that people in New Zealand get about alcohol, and very similar to what previous speakers have said, is the idea that you shouldn't do it this way, you shouldn't do it that way, you shouldn't binge drink, but here it is being glamorised and being sponsoring in sports events and all these ads that make it seem like a very chic and desirable thing to do. We need a culture shift in terms of how we approach alcohol. And one of the things that makes us a little bit different to some of the other parties is that we want to introduce gender equality education within schools at primary school, but also media literacy programs. And media literacy programs can then help young people also dismantle some of those messages they're getting about alcohol, drugs within the mainstream media.
Deborah, and is there anybody else in the candidates who wish to speak? Iain, you can go next.
One of the priorities that the Labour Party has in terms of healthcare is working on mental health and addiction. Those are both critical to changing our attitudes around alcohol and changing the way that people use alcohol. So that's another concrete thing that we're going to be doing. It's sitting there right in our health policy. And we're also going to start working on early intervention for people caught drink driving. That's a critical thing we can do as well. Obviously it'll help in terms of road accidents, but again it's a way of targeting people who perhaps have issues with alcohol and making sure we get to them and help them to change their behaviour.
Iain McKelvie.
Ironically, this is a conscience issue in Parliament, so not all the parties vote as they just talked now, quite clearly. So I want to make it clear, I voted against the increase, the raise of the drinking age in Parliament, and I'll tell you why I voted against it. Because I believe alcohol, like many other, I guess, institutional factors we have in this country, are a personal issue, and if you can't manage yourself personally, then you probably should abstain from it. And you might all say, oh, but I notice you're all about 70, the ones saying, oh. It's a fact. If you can't look out for yourself, and you don't drink, and so I think that's the reason I voted the way I voted. And in fact, if you look at rural New Zealand, we don't have an opportunity to change things for the different. So it's, in my view, when you're out on a sharing gang or whatever you're in, it's all encompassing. And at the end of the day, you learn from your peers. And I think that's how the world works, and I think it's a matter of personal responsibility. That's why I voted the way I did.
Alcohol-related harm is clearly comprehensive and goes right across a whole lot of spheres. Now, there are plenty of countries in the world who have more permissive alcohol laws than us that don't have the same problems as us. So to simply say about tightening up legislation is going to fix alcohol-related harm in New Zealand is oversimplifying issues. Personally, I've got to say, I quite like the idea of the split age idea that was proposed. Personally, that would have been something that I would have got my support. But I think the key thing we need to remember is it's actually a societal thing that we all need to take responsibility for. We actually all need to take responsibility when we're raising our kids, that we're educating them appropriately about that. That actually when we're confronted with people who are inflicting alcohol-related harm, that we're treating them in the way that they need to be treated to make some changes. And I think a lot of it that we talk about around the legislation is really just tinkering. And what we need to do is actually address some of the actual underlying social concerns that actually cause the alcohol-related harm, rather than just how and when we buy it.
I need to clarify. I really need to clarify something.
I
really do need to.
You go, I'm going to.
Yeah.
He's the only party who hasn't said anything at this
Because
point.
it's completely misleading, I'm afraid. Yeah.
All right, I don't want to repeat myself, but sorry.
Sorry,
Oh,
just answering him.
absolutely, not a problem. Look, the Conservative Party, this is a very serious issue for us, and even though I said before, I'm just going to repeat what I said. We want to increase the minimum legal drinking age to 20. We also want to increase the excise tax on alcohol. Now, if we bring it into line with what Australia do, that would mean quite a substantial increase. Their tax is a lot higher than ours, so we would look to do that. Also, we want to introduce minimum pricing so that significant social costs are addressed. And we do support enforcement of the law banning public intoxication and associated antisocial behaviour. But it does also come back to the family, mums and dads, working with the young people, supporting them, and us as a community educating and helping our young people when it comes to alcohol. So thank you.
Right. We're just going to move on to the next question. There's a question right at the back. I think what we'll do, if the microphone goes down the back, that you'd be best to come and stand here.
Yeah.
Iain McKelvie mentioned that a lot of our New Zealand economy is based actually around the environment. What is very interesting to me is that in talking to DOC staff, I've come to realise that DOC, having had 45 million extracted from its budget for tourism, which Iain said was the other kind of leg, can't actually look after all the reserves and the land that they're actually responsible for, let alone the extra places that people have covenanted to look after. I would like to know what you parties are going to do to enable our state of the environment to be improved in that respect rather than be slumped, because it's quite clear from the Treasury vote and the measurements they have over time for the last few years that the government can't achieve it with volunteer help what they had expected in creating those budgets with Treasury. Thank you.
So you're asking a question about the funding for boat conservation. Okay. Pani, would you like to start?
A specific statement for that. So it's about the Department of Conservation. So we've got a specific policy on that for the Internet Party. We will have an immediate review of the Department of Conservation in terms of its resources, policies, strategies and future directions to ensure it has the capacity to protect and enhance New Zealand's conservation estate and maintain its relevance to the 100 Pure tourism brand. So it's one of the things that we're very passionate about, and it's high up on our policy list of things that need to be reviewed, reassessed and managed differently.
Iain McKelvie.
I'll attempt to answer that question. I won't answer it very well, unfortunately, because it's quite a complex question, but there's a couple of factors that have changed dramatically in DOC in the last 2 years. One is the involvement of community organisations with DOC, and the other is the involvement of sponsorship or partnership with DOC. And that's where the government has moved to try and shore up the shortfall in the budget, because you're absolutely right, there is a significant shortfall in the budget, and so DOC is now concentrating on the things that matter most to its community, as well as working in much closer partnership with many organisations in New Zealand, and also working in partnership with some commercial organisations. But you're quite right that DOC is challenged, like every other organisation in New Zealand, around its budget.
Deborah.
It's a very simple question. Will the Labour government restore the funding cut from DOC? Yes.
I'll just read this. New Zealand First will encourage local government use of the Community Ways scheme for conservation and weed and pest control activities and for environmental activities, including the beautification and maintenance of waterways, beaches, parks and roadsides, and measures to clean up pollution. In addition, we'll support the Historic Places Trust, the Forest Heritage Fund, the QE2 Trust, Landcare and Ngā Whenua Rahui, and explore other means of encouraging the voluntary protection of natural and historical resources in private ownership.
So it's not a complex question, as Iain would have you believe. It's actually really simple. We have to restore the funding for DOC. National has more cuts planned over the next 10 years in real terms. We will reverse those cuts. But we have to, as Iain said, we have to know that the environment is the foundation of the economy, and we have to look at this as an opportunity. If we allow the loss of biodiversity, then we threaten our economy. What we should be doing is actually making our Clean Green brand a reality. Look at the global situation. By 2015, there's set to be $8 trillion investment in clean green energy. If we get just 1% of that global economic activity, we could see a transformation of our economy. If it's in agriculture, the way of the future is not intensive dairying. The way of the future is adding value to our products. Farmers know that, Fonterra knows that, they need the support to do it. Government is failing to provide leadership. The Green Party will provide leadership. We need your party to kill it.
Look, Conservative Party, by nature, we're very conservative. So we would like to see a review done, particularly in relation to your question down the back there, as far as DOC is concerned, and find out where the money is going, how it's being resourced, and what they're doing with it. But we certainly promote looking after our land. It's a limited resource here in New Zealand, so we do want to look after it and resource it appropriately. Thank you.
Yeah. Right, thank you. Anybody else? Jono, Naylor.
Thank you. I think New Zealand's been through some really difficult times, and it's been some quite tight fiscal management that's had to go in place. And so we've been borrowing money over the last 6 years in order to make ends meet, because it has been a difficult time. We've managed to increase funding for health and education and welfare, and obviously DOC hasn't been able to be kept up with that. I think the important thing about that is that's the important thing for us to get back into surplus, to get a strong economy going again, that will actually free up the opportunity to start reinvesting into places like DOC, which is critically important for us going forward. The other thing that the tight financial times has meant is that actually some of those private partnerships, other companies who have been investing into the work of DOC and in conservation in general, have also been finding it a bit tougher and probably haven't been investing to the same degree as well. So I think what we need to do going forward is for us to look, as we generate surpluses, we haven't committed every dollar that we think is going to be in the next few years, and DOC is clearly at some place that we could look to explore further funding for.
Okay, Rulma, you've got a question?
Sorry, I would like to answer that question if I may. Thank you. So, look, this issue of what you do in tight financial times, it's all about priorities. So this government had $1.4 billion worth to give to tax cuts to rich people, but it didn't have money to fund DOC. It had $35 million to give to private schools, but it didn't have $14 million to give to adult and community education. We're as committed to paying off National's record debt as any other party is. In fact, we think we can do it over 6 years with our fiscal plan, and we can make sure we provide for the things that are a priority to us, and that certainly includes DOC.
Thank you. We've heard quite a bit about the lower socioeconomic groupings of people in this country. I would like to find out what, if anything, in what way any government that comes into government will make a difference over the widening gap between the top 10% and the bottom 10% of this country. I came to New Zealand in 1972. In the late 1970s, we were told that we had to tighten our belts for a little while and then everything would trickle back down. Instead, we have had to force the lower socioeconomic group of people to tighten their belts even tighter, and the higher socioeconomic group widened their belt enormously, and no trickle down effect happened.
Can you please state your question in terms of which of those questions?
I asked the question at the beginning. What, if anything, is the government that comes into effect will they start doing in order to reduce or begin reducing even that enormous, abysmal gap?
Yes, Deborah.
Oh, so much. We are going to raise the minimum wage in the first 100 days that we get in, from $14.25 to $15.25, and that would be part of the start to doing a number of things we're going to do. They'll tell you that they will have an effect on employment, but I've got research here that shows that a modest increase in the minimum wage does not affect jobs at all. We will then raise it again so that by April next year we'll be up to $16 an hour. That's the first thing we're going to do, and so raise the wages of low-paid workers. At the top end, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to introduce a capital gains tax that will ensure that the wealthiest pay their fair share of income. We're also going to increase the tax rate on people earning more than $150,000 an hour. That top tax rate will go to 36 cents in the dollar. That's an increase of 3 cents in the dollar for people earning over $150,000 an hour, and we'll keep the trust rate up with it. We're getting there.
I think it means 150,000 a year.
New Zealand First is very committed to reducing that gap, and we have some very specific policies that will attack it head on. We're going to take GST off your food, we're going to take GST off the residential rates, we're going to increase the minimum wage to $17. If you work 2 jobs, we're going to get rid of secondary tax. These are all policies that will directly affect you and put money back into your pocket.
But what about
Pani.
Thank you. So the Internet Mana movement is fundamentally about an approach that's going to uphold social justice and equality for all. It's not about where you were born, what skin colour you have, what school you went to, and how much you earn. We should all have the same rights, and one of those things is to not live in poverty. So one of the things that we're going to, we believe in sharing our wealth. We will bring in a financial transactions tax. We will bring in a wealth tax, and we'll also bring in a capital gains tax. We also want to support the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement because we don't believe that's good for the sovereignty of our people, and that it will give way too much power to global corporates when it comes to running New Zealand, and there will be absolutely no trickle-down effect. We know this from the 70s. Was that a minute or 30?
So the gap between the rich and the poor in this country has never been wider, and this is the result of successive governments, both national and Labour, and the policy decisions that they have made. We are committed to reducing the gap between the rich and the poor. Firstly, we will institute a progressive tax system. We will create a new top tax rate for those who earn over $140,000. No other party suggesting anything near that. That is only 3% of income earners. They should pay more. They get massive support from the government. We won't be borrowing $1.2 billion every year to fund tax cuts to those top 10%. That is just ridiculous. We will immediately lift the minimum wage to $15 an hour. By 2017 we'll get it to $18 an hour. We will limit the ability of CEOs to get pay rises unless their workers also get pay rises. We will strengthen collective bargaining and strengthen unions. We will institute New Zealand Power, so low-income families have access to power for cheaper rates. It's about $300 a year. We'll institute a carbon tax. That's another $300 a year, so family and polluters will pay for it.
Now, is anybody from the Conservative Party, Mr. Brown, you want to speak?
Sure, thank you. All right, well look, one of our main policies this campaign is we want to introduce where your first $20,000 of income is tax-free. Then after that we want to look at reviewing and looking at a flat tax. Now some people say, how can you afford that, Roy? And I see that Colin took a bit of a stick pasting on the debate the other night, but they all shouted him down and he couldn't get out what he was going to say, so I'll say it for him instead. We need to look at the books and we need to see what's happening with the money in regards to tax, and we will certainly do that when we're in Parliament after this election. The other thing that we want to look at is promote income splitting for couples. We believe that will lower your tax rates overall, and we will certainly encourage that. So thank you.
Now, Mr. Rudzki would like to speak, and then does someone from the National Party? Mr. McKelvie.
I've been spending a great deal thinking about this, and I summarised it in one way. The wealth of a nation can be summarised as to how rich the rich are. There is another way to ask yourself how rich the poor are. Because it's appropriate that we're in a church. Because in the good book it says, of those who have much, much will be demanded. And that's why wealth is a great blessing. But poverty is a curse. And we need to attack poverty and remember what it is. It destroys families, it destroys communities, it leads to people to taking their own lives, it leads to poverty in childhood, and it is a blight upon a land. We therefore need to get rid of poverty. And if that means that the rich have to do a little bit more, well, they've got an awful lot more to do.
Mr. McKelvie now.
So I did partly answer this question when I addressed the issue of our young people earlier on. The government has a clear policy of creating an economy where everyone can participate and everyone can earn more money. And if you look at the, yes, I don't expect you to agree with me. And if you think about the budget, just recently announced budget, where it pointed out quite clearly that average salaries will increase by $7,000 in the next 3 years. That's a fair good start, and that's created by a much more vibrant economy. I just want to talk about capital gains for a minute, because the capital gains tax will not impact on the rich, unfortunately. It will impact on the normal person in New Zealand who goes out, as I said earlier, to work every day, sets up their little business, and then goes to sell it. It'll also impact on every person who's got their house in a trust, as clearly pointed out in New Zealand. So those facts won't impact on the issue we're talking about. The only way we'll fix the issue we're talking about is to build a much stronger economy and involve people and let people get into work, and decent work.
Mr. McKelvie, is increasing.
There's a question over here. Over this gentleman's turn over here.
There's one here as well.
Yes.
One of the two major contributions to our economy, which hasn't been mentioned tonight for obvious reasons, it seems to centre very much on the rural area, it's tourism. Our clean green image has taken a lot of knocks recently. I'd hesitate to ask everybody because of time, but I think it's pertinent to know, what would your parties do to improve overseas our clean, what's the most important thing we could do to lift that image up to really meaningful things, to bring more tourists into our country? And I have to admit, I am in the accommodation industry and I do have a vested interest.
Right, who would like to begin? Over at the end? Jono.
Look, there's no question actually that New Zealand's image is really, really important overseas, whether it's for attracting tourism or attracting actually the people with the skills that we need also to come and work here. So what's quite important in that is actually the marketing of it, as much as what we're doing on the ground. But I think we've already outlined what we want to do. We want to steadily improve the environment in New Zealand. We want to maintain what we've got, and we've got to keep pushing that forward. We've got some great things for people to come and look at and see, and part of it actually is just promotion going forward as well.
Thank you. Jack.
First of all, I'm going to take the opportunity to correct something Mr. McKelvie said. Our capital gains tax policy quite clearly says that
we've done that.
We're a small business person. We're a small business person saves up and has owned their business for 15 years, and the first $250,000 of what is in effect their retirement savings is free from the capital gains tax. I know that policy inside out, and I do not accept that someone else can get up and say something that is quite wrong about it. Now, in terms of tourism, what we need is that clean, green image, and it has to be based on fact and reality. Stephen Joyce said that people who talked about our polluted waterways overseas were traitors. I say they were truth sayers. And we need to tell the truth, and in order to be able to tell the truth, we need to clean up our waterways, and that's what we will be doing.
So it's absolutely correct that both tourism and agriculture, which are our two biggest industries, completely rely on our clean green brand. And that means we have to protect our environment as a first priority. And Jono actually has some truth in what he's saying. Marketing is important. So then why do we have a Prime Minister who goes over to England and gets absolutely demolished on the BBC because we have such poor water quality? He has overseen that failure to act on water quality. So what are the important things to fix that clean green brand? It is ensuring that all of our rivers are clean enough to swim again. It is protecting our biodiversity, ensuring that we don't have extinctions. For example, the Maui's dolphin. The Green Party will save the Maui's dolphin. It is about ensuring that we have clean beaches where we don't have massive oil spills, so we will prohibit deep sea oil drilling. It's about protecting the health of our land and our people, so we will put a moratorium on fracking. There's so much we can do. We have to have a change of government to achieve it, and we have to have a strong Green Party at the heart of that government. Kia ora.
Thank you for the question. I think I've covered most of the strategies that the Internet Mana Party wants to approach this issue. The main thing is, how do we make our image more clean and green is actually being more clean and green. So we actually have to live by the marketing strategy that we tout. You know, I'll never forget, I grew up in Iran, and I was going back there when I was 18, and as the plane descended to get into Tehran, there was a clear, thick amount of smog, brown smog that we descended through. That is not what we want for our future. The most important global issue that we're facing is environmental stuff, and that's the thing that we need to make a priority. And I think one of the ways forward is in our digital economy and innovation policy. We want to move us from a farming and just only tourism-based economy to the digital and technological future, where we become at the forefront of the global research and product distribution of such things, which will in turn fix the environment.
Thank you to that gentleman for the question. New Zealand First has policies on tourism. I'm just going to mention two of them. New Zealand First will enhance the New Zealand Tourism Board's destination marketing strategies, focusing in particular on adventure tourism, eco-tourism such as the whale watching at Kaikoura, and cultural tourism such as the world of wearable arts. We'll also support regional tourism developments and macro-region initiatives to stimulate economic growth in the provinces. If you've ever been to Ireland, they have this wonderful bed and breakfast network. I'm convinced that if you said your next destination was the moon, a lady would say, oh, I've got a cousin up there and she'll get you a lovely place. And that's a wonderful thing about going to Ireland because of this network. Thank you.
I think you'll agree with me, and I'm very biased, but we have a beautiful country, and I have travelled the world extensively, and I always come home and I say, boy, I'm glad to live in such a wonderful country. But, I'll put a big but there, we do need to look after our environment, and particularly when it comes to tourism. And I'm going to give you a general answer, sir, but however, our Conservative Party would say we need to make it easier to do business in New Zealand. And we also need to help our business owners and encourage business, and in so doing help our tourism industry as well. But there needs to be a fine balance there, and we would look to encourage that I think of the South Island, it's such a magnificent part of the country, but then personally I look at all the gorse, and I'm going off track here, but I look at all the gorse. Why can't we do something about getting rid of that and making the country look fantastic? So, yeah, that's a personal opinion, not a party opinion, but it is personal. Thank
you. Look, it's got to be about more than just marketing, because in the 21st century our consumers can see through our marketing. They can see the truth. They can find out the truth behind the glossy magazines and the advertisements that we put out there. Actually, I think the answer to this is to go back to New Zealand being an international leader. We've always stood up for what we believed in. We stood up for nuclear free. We were a world leader on that. We were a small player in World War II, but we went and played our part. We were a small player in opposing apartheid, but we played our part. We used to be a leader on climate change. We used to be a leader on the international environmental issues. Then we became a fast follower. Now we're at the back of the pack. That's what's destroying our international reputation on the environment. We have to be leaders again.
Yes. We're going to next have the gentleman in the pale coat, and then Lorna will come to you after. Oh, sorry, Iain.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Didn't you have a turn earlier?
No.
Big pun, it was Mr. Naylor who spoke earlier.
I don't think any of us have a different point of view on this, really. I think it's just a matter of how we go about it. But I just want to say that the importance that this government places on it is the fact that our Prime Minister is the Minister of Tourism, for one, and leads the New Zealand effort to promote itself internationally. And I think we are doing very well with our environment, considering where we've been.
Now, let's have another question over here.
Thank you very much. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from here. As an expat Canadian, I just want to thank all of you for coming today. One of the things I've learned time and time again is the power of local communities to find local solutions for local problems. So everybody who's here, you stepped up to the plate. Congratulations.
Talking to the microphone.
My question is for Mr. Naylor. Mr. Naylor, I don't have any particular axe to grind with you. I've only seen you in action once. That was at the Board of Inquiry hearing for the Cherokee Wind Farm. The opinion of council that day, including myself, was that your testimony was at best evasive. In that context, and in light of the secret deal that Palmerston North City Council made with Mighty River Power, the initial stages of which shut everybody in this room out of that decision-making process, and the fact that so much extra money was required to rectify that evasiveness that you and others displayed on the stand, to the cost of myself as a ratepayer and a lot of other people in this room. My question to you is this: how is it that you can basically sit there and tell us that you can advocate for profound environmental consultation outcomes when your outcome environmental discussion and consultation has been basically atrocious?
That was a specific question for a specific person.
I guess no one else can answer this because it's directed just at me, but look, clearly you're going back a few years there in terms of my involvement at the Board of Inquiry, and what the situation there was is that Council entered into a good faith agreement with Mighty River Power. Mighty River Power then actually put forward their proposal, and actually the Palmerston North City Council, as a general rule, wasn't comfortable with the full proposal that was put forward. And so we actually gave testimony and evidence to support independent views. So that was that went to a Board of Inquiry. That wasn't necessarily our choice that it went to that. And in order to protect the public from that Board of Inquiry, we actually then put significant expense that was unbudgeted and hadn't been planning on doing it to ensure that the community's views got a clear hearing at that Board of Inquiry. So we spent your money to protect the views of the Palmerston North ratepayers and to ensure that their voice got heard at that Board of Inquiry, and that was why I went there to represent those views.
Thank you.
Thanks. My question is just, I'll have one person from each party to answer on their party policy, if that's all right. So my question is about housing. So last month, the Child Poverty Action Group released a report that said that children are suffering from overcrowded living conditions and risks to their health as rental housing gets more expensive and worse quality, and that 12.6% of homes in South Auckland house at least two families, that the quality of rental properties is contributing to poor health in children being affected by mould and damp.
Yeah.
And that in Christchurch rents have risen by 20 to 30% in the last 5 years. And it recommends developing a national housing plan to meet people's needs. So my question is, what's your party's plan to deal with the poor housing that children are having to suffer in New Zealand at the moment? Thank you.
We'll start at this end where they are one person per party while the ones at the other end decide who's going to speak on behalf.
Well done, Bob.
Thank you for the question, Lorna. And as you lay out, we do have a housing crisis, and as a young person, I'm really worried that my generation is going to be shut out of the housing market for a long time into the future. So what are we going to do about it? Well, our plan is this. Firstly, we're going to build thousands of more state houses every year, but we're not just going to have those estate houses, we're going to allow young families to get into those state houses, and all of their rent is actually going into buying equity into their own home. So it's called a progressive ownership scheme. And so they're able to actually, into the future, they'll be able to sell their equity, cash into their equity in that home and then get into other housing. But perhaps the most important, in terms of your exact question, is our warrant of fitness on all rental properties policy, which we've been advocating for over 5 years. And so that's going to ensure that there's a minimum standard for rental properties, that they're all warm and dry. We've worked with the government to insulate over 200,000 homes. We want to insulate a further 200,000, which the current government's failed to commit money to. We also want to ensure secure tenancy, because we know that if families have to move around all the time, then they're not able to hold down good jobs, and kids aren't able to hold down good education. So we have to fix all of those issues.
Mr Brown, from the Conservative Party.
All right, look, I'm going to read you a specific policy for the Conservative Party. Now, we want to address the shortfall in the supply of housing caused by artificial urban limits and zoning, ensuring that sensible restrictions are put in place that do not increase the problem. We also want to remove unnecessary regulation and compliance costs from the residential housing sector. That slows down our development programs. We want to get rid of that. So in other words, cut the red tape. We want to encourage greater efficiency in the market, and we also want to find innovative ways to help New Zealand families into their first homes. We would look at doing this through the use of tax incentives, changes to KiwiSaver, reassessment of the loan-to-value ratios, and the increase of supply. The other thing that we want to look at is a refund of the proportion of GST for first-time house buyers. Now that's, in short, 25% for a single person, or 50% per couple on all new houses built with a maximum build cost of $300,000 including GST. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've already told you about the $30,000 new homes that we're going to build in the first 3 years. So that's 10,000 homes each year, state-owned rental properties, which will all have the warrant of fitness check that we'll also bring in for every other single rental property. That's one way to deal with the housing crisis, by decreasing the demand for rental property as it exists. We also need a redistribution and a rethinking of how we're populating New Zealand. So Auckland is sort of bursting at the seams, and it's the most expensive place to live, where there are other cities that have a lot more land and a lot more capacity to take on more people. The other thing that we will do is have low interest schemes, loan schemes for people trying to get into their first homes, including the requirement that they will only have to have a small amount of deposit if they're from a low-income family, and this will be done through Kiwi Bank, and there will be a specific policy and plan for low-income Māori families. Thanks.
Thank you.
New Zealand First has some very specific policies on the housing issue. Obviously, it's a massive problem around the country, and we've got a housing crisis, and I don't think the current government actually accepts that yet. So it'll be interesting to see what the National Party has to say. New Zealand First believes that all New Zealanders who are working must have a genuine opportunity to buy their own home. New Zealand First believes that there is only achievable by direct government intervention in New Zealand's overheated housing market. There is more than enough housing at the top end of the incomes and serious shortages at the bottom end. One of the policies that New Zealand First is going to bring in is it's going to establish a state agency that purchases land that has already been identified in special housing areas, and we will sell that to first home buyers at very low interest rates starting at 2%. So they have to worry about the cost, and it will dramatically decrease the cost, especially of the capital, for first home buyers.
So the housing affordability crisis is a market failure. And so freeing up more land and pumping more money into the Auckland housing market, which is National's plan, will simply create more urban sprawl and more opportunities for the market to continue to fail. What we need is for the government to step in. We will build 100,000 new affordable homes over 10 years. Those will be the homes that first-time home buyers can afford to get into the property market. But in terms of the quality of rental housing, we need to make sure that we're going to introduce a warrant of fitness for rental housing as well. We'll phase that in over 5 years so that there's opportunities for landlords and tenants to adapt to that. And we also need to make sure that we've got plenty of state houses. There are people in the city who are in desperate need of accommodation, and meanwhile we have empty land that's been sitting there for 6 years with nothing done with it, and now we've got more empty land and more plans to destroy state houses with no plan to replace them. Labour will replace them, we'll build state houses.
The difficulty with just talking about it just from a housing perspective is that it's actually a really complex issue. So I'll try and break it down as much as I can within a minute. So where you've got more than one family living in a house is clearly a demand and supply issue. So one of the things we are doing is we've actually been working particularly in Auckland with the Auckland Council about freeing up more land to address the supply. We've got a new Home Start package to help first homeowners buy their properties. Now the thing you've got to remember about adding things like capital gains taxes and warrant of fitnesses onto the cost for landlords is that many of them are likely simply just to pass that cost on. Yesterday when I was out knocking on doors, I spoke to a guy, said he's not going to vote for anyone who puts in a capital gains tax because he knows that to recuperate the cost of that to him, he would put his rents up by $20 a week. Now I don't think that's going to help anybody who's struggling to pay their rent going forward. So we've got to take a balanced look at it. We've also got to make sure that what we're doing is attract investment to create jobs in the regions so that people will want to move here and not live in Auckland where it's struggling. Sorry, there you go.
There's a question down the back, the gentleman in black.
I just want to ask a very simple question of each candidate. Have you read Nicky Harker's book? And if you've read it, do you believe it to be true?
That question does not address the two topics for the meeting, so we'll put that one on hold and see if we can get some topics around the meeting. It's right in front of you. This one? Yes.
Hello, my question is for each individual party, and it's in regard to the very high numbers we have in New Zealand of people incarcerated, and in particular the increasing numbers in our youth who are being arrested for pretty heinous crimes. What are your party policies, I guess, law and order, and perhaps looking especially at rehabilitation? I work at Massey, we have some students studying while incarcerated and there is little to no support. What are your parties proposing?
Is in this time?
Yes, go for that in this time.
I was wondering while we get the answer. I think in New Zealand we are making some pretty good progress with respect to the topic you've raised, because in law and order in New Zealand, and I've had the opportunity, I guess, to visit pretty much every prison in New Zealand and every other organisation associated with justice, and I think we're doing pretty well. So we have increased the opportunity for prisoners to be educated, their literacy and numeracy skills are concentrated on significantly, and their opportunity to get out and come back into our community in a much better form than they went into prison is hugely important, and that's the only way we're going to rectify some of those challenges. On the topic of the numbers in prison, the numbers in prison haven't risen at all in the last 3 years, sitting at about 7,800. So our prison numbers are pretty much static, and our crime numbers are dropping significantly. In fact, our youth crime numbers have dropped by 19%. So that's where we're at the moment.
There's an interesting thing going on with crime, is that crime rates have actually been dropping for the last 25 years or so. It's a demographic thing. So that's quite good, actually. So it's a bit of a shame that our prison muster hasn't been dropping quite as rapidly. Look, one of the things we know about the inmates in our prison is that a huge number of them are suffering from brain damage and from addiction issues and from mental health issues. So in terms of sorting out something about our prisons, we actually need to prioritise mental health. that will help the starters. While we've got people in prisons, we're going to make sure that we've got health services and addiction services, literacy and numeracy services to ensure that we actually really help those prisoners as part of the purpose is rehabilitation. And we will make sure that every prisoner, as they leave, that we work with them in a reintegration plan so that they do not arrive back in prison. We want them to be rehabilitated and we want them to be able to stay rehabilitated.
The reality is that New Zealand has a disproportionately high prison population. The reason is that some of those people shouldn't be in prison. They should be in drug rehab or mental hospital. We are using the prisons for things that are not designed for. Some criminals can be rehabilitated. They can be taught trades and they can come back and be useful members of society. But at the other extreme, there are people who should never be let out. Life should mean life, especially for premeditated murder. We know that's true because they're let out on parole and they offend again. So we need to have a complete review of sentencing, and there have been recent cases where people have got off. The case of Darby, the lad who was kicked to death, the people who perpetrated that left without any sentence.
We have some specific policies relating to this, and I want to read you. Sorry? Oh, thank you. The Interim Party believes in a fair, restorative, balanced and solution-focused system of justice for New Zealand that involves the community. We want an increase in the use of non-custodial, rehabilitative and restorative approaches to overcoming crime in the community through a series of action-based approaches, action-based and internationally proven approaches. We want to continue to improve the systems and programs in the prisons so that when prisoners are released, they have actually somewhere to go in terms of job, education, housing and other services. One of the things that I'm also very passionate about, being the gender policy spokesperson, is that we're looking at a review and modification of the way that we deal with sexual assault cases and family violence cases. We need to move to a place of safety rather than reconciliation when it comes to family violence between individuals.
Very good question, thank you for that. Conservative Party wants tougher penalties for criminals. Now we have number 3 on our party list is well-known New Zealander Garth McVicker, who founded the Sensible Sentencing Trust. And he has advocated for people for many, many years, for victims of crime, many, many years. So we want tougher penalties for criminals. We also want to abolish parole. We believe that if you do the crime, you do the time and you see out your full sentence. Thirdly, we also want to ensure and look at prisoners working while they're in prison. 2 benefits to that. They're not being lazy, and the second one is they may pick up a skill while they're in there. So we would encourage that prisoners also work while they're inside. So, but mainly our main policy is we want to see tougher penalties on our criminals.
We know that tough penalties don't work, and let's face it, I mean, Iain says we're making progress. That depends on how we measure progress. Is progress locking up more people constantly? No, it's not. Is progress building more prisons and actually making them public-private partnerships? No, it's not. I think we've reached a low point in our society when we have prisons for profit. It's just absolutely obscene. So the Green Party is committed to restorative justice. The Green Party is committed to ensuring that justice is based in community and actually benefits community. And so when it's youth crime, a lot of it can be dealt with through youth justice forums. It can be dealt with through reconciliation. It doesn't have to be about locking people up, because we know that locking people up breeds more criminality and makes people better criminals. Yeah. We have to have a complete rethink.
Yeah. We're conscious of the time, so people are getting tired. Only 2 more. 2 more questions. There's one. 2 more. There was one. There's one at the back. There's down here, and you're second. We'll only take 2 more. That one, and you're number 2, and that's it.
My question is just about family and community services, especially around children, specifically Women's Refuge. It's just a question to a representative of each party. Especially with the UN slamming New Zealand for its domestic violence record, and especially the government's response to it, especially when there's a 27% of children had witnessed physical violence against an adult, and most of these incidents have been at home. And in April, the Women's Refuge Safe House in the Manawatu, one or two, had to close because of funding, insufficient funding. 800,000 was cut to funding towards Women's Refuge was cut in the 2011 budget. Yes, so my question is about what is your party's policy specifically towards Women's Refuge and Family and Community Services, because frankly when you have $30 million for the American Cup, yeah.
I thought we might start in the middle this time and work our way to the
Just very simply, very quickly, we're going to increase funding to Women's Refuge. It's a very important part of our society and one of those support mechanisms that we cannot do without.
Right. And then yours will go back.
First of all, I'd just like to offer congratulations to Mark Farvid, who was the young man who organised the anti-Roastbusters protest in Palmerston North last year. Well done, Mark. We know all the sorry states around violence against women. We know that people have said desperately pleaded for more funding in the sector. The national government has offered $10.4 million over 2 years. It's a drop in the bucket. Those are the words from people leading women's refuge services in this country. We have promised $60 million over 4 years. That's $15 million a year in order to support the work that Women's Refuge do. We also have a national plan for addressing violence against women. We know it's a critical issue. It is so important to us that it's our leader's portfolio. He has said that he will take responsibility with us this because it needs to be a whole of government approach, and we all need to be critically concerned with it. So we will be doing our best to ensure that those really horrific stats around violence against women change.
Thank you. So this is a topic close to my heart, obviously being the gender spokesperson for the internet party. What we want to do is provide continued, increased, and
The sign.
the sign, yeah. Maybe I just turned it off. No,
Come and stand.
Oh, the battery's dead. Yeah, the battery's dead. Hi. So, increased, continued, and sustained support for all the support services that work with gender-based violence of any kind. We have a very detailed gender policy plan to deal with violence in our community, and that includes primary, secondary, and tertiary preventions. So the primary prevention starts before the violence has occurred at any level, and that includes gender equality education within schools, media literacy throughout the school years, teaching boys not only to not be violent towards women, but to not be violent individuals at all. And that goes for women as well. Secondary prevention is when the violence has occurred. Then we will deal with it at the community level, where they will get more increased funding, better trained police officers and judges to deal with such cases. And at the tertiary level, it will be having continued support for victims of such situation.
Look, that's a great question. In fact, this is dear to my heart. I actually watched one of my own staff go through a very difficult personal situation, and if it wasn't for Women's Refuge, she would have been in a lot of trouble. So I have a lot of respect for that organisation, and personally I would love to see increased funding to them, and I'm sure, and I can't speak on behalf of the party because it's a particular issue obviously, but we would certainly look at resourcing it more and increasing that. So thank you.
Jono.
So this is an incredibly important issue, and the Green Party not only has really strong policy on it, but we've actually led by example, and we have the track record. So over the past term, our Women's Affairs spokesperson, Jan Logie, who's a current MP, has campaigned very strong on domestic and sexual violence. Her campaigning has forced the government to provide that extra $10 million, which is a drop in the bucket, but is good in the first instance. Her campaigning has forced a select committee inquiry. She has been the voice of the frontline services. She advocated for the idea that we can't take a siloed approach and that we have to have an all-government approach, and so it's good that Labour's picked up on that policy. So we have led on this issue, and we will continue to do so. We need more funding. As you said, services are closing down. That's completely unacceptable, and I think it's important to mention that as men, we need to take our share of the collective responsibility for violent male culture that breeds this violence. We have to stand up, we have to say it's not good enough, we have to do more.
I hope for a day when Women's Refuge gets no funding because there's no violence towards women, and I think that's the aspiration that we should aim for. But in the meantime, that's not going to happen, is it? So in budget 2014, we did put more money towards Women's Refuge. I also said a few weeks back, and we'll say this commitment again, I believe this is such an important issue for our nation that actually, should I find myself and have the privilege to be in Parliament after September 20th, I want to commit myself to working hard to make sure that we do eliminate violence in our society against women and children. I think it's something that we need to work together as parties to do, instead of actually competing and fighting and saying we've got a better policy than you or otherwise. Let's find something that works and let's do it together, and let's get rid of the scourge from our society.
You have the honour of having the last question.
I'm hoping this one's appropriate.
I'll tell you if it's not.
Okay. Can I say now? My question is about New Zealand, foreigners owning land in New Zealand, just what the policies are.
No, that's not appropriate.
Damn it. Please.
Over here then. Well, you were on number 3, so you can go.
You might be right, actually. Yeah. You might be right, yeah. Okay, come back. Come back. Come back. You're right.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, well, I'm here now anyway. My son has a my son has a fantastic way of learning. He hops on YouTube, right, and types in how to, and then he learns, and then he just follows the prompts on the video. Apart from safer, warmer, more affordable homes, what's your policies on getting technology into the hands of our school children?
Should we answer the other guy?
Wait here.
Yeah.
You didn't like that question so well?
I'm happy with that question, but I was thinking...
Okay, let's do this. Do that question
we'll deal
first.
with that one first.
Yeah, and then move on back to this one.
Okay, so look, Labour's policy is that we want to make sure that every child gets what some schools and some children are already getting and doing, and that is from year 5 upwards. We want every child to have access to an affordable digital device. That might be a laptop, it might be a tablet, but a Chromebook is probably the best and most affordable way to do that. And we also want to make sure that that families have affordable internet at home. If you head over to Highbury, half the families in Highbury with dependent children have no internet access. That means that the kids growing up in those families are not getting the same advantages as the other children in their class. So this is actually something now which has become pretty much a human right. It's like power, it's like running water. Having internet access is fundamental to children's learning. So an affordable digital device for every child from year 5 upwards, and affordable access to internet for families with dependent children.
Okay.
Anybody else wants to say something? Right, I'm the internet party. I have to say something about it. Can't not say anything. So obviously this is one of the areas where we're most passionate about. We have a substantial plan for making New Zealand have faster, cheaper, universal internet and broadband. We can't function on the one cable that's coming from South America anymore, and we have a substantial plan to make that better. Every single child needs to have internet access at school and at home. Our plan for schools is that they should have free, fast broadband, and it should be uncapped so that every single individual and teacher can use that in the classroom. Each child should have access to a device, whether it's government subsidised or if their family can afford it. We also want to change the way that students are learning in schools. We want to take it away from a teacher-focused, top-down approach to a student and individually focused, bottom-up approach. And the internet is basically the metaphor for that. It's all about freedom and individuality.
We'll deal with this question first, and then we'll get back to your question.
Surprising. I can't wait for those other parties to get into the position of being able to put internet connectivity as a human right throughout my electorate, because it certainly won't happen in a hurry. And that's the real challenge we've got in rural New Zealand. But I would like to just add the fact that this government has just recently added another $100 million to the broadband connectivity issue, and another $100 million to rural broadband, and $50 million to making our cell phone connectivity in rural New Zealand better. It is a huge challenge for rural New Zealand. and you're really not much point in having a digital toy if you can't use it, and that's the challenge we face in the Rangitikei, frankly.
Can I ask again?
You coming?
Pani just said something interesting to me. She said that the speed of New Zealand's internet is half the speed of Romania.
Twice as long.
Yeah, it takes twice as long in New Zealand than it does in Romania. New Zealand first policy is common sense. Of course we should. There was a time when, you know, reading and writing was the only way to engage in society. Now we're expected to be literate in terms of our information literacy and so on and so forth. So of course we will support it, all the way down to early childhood education.
I'll just be very brief. Just very briefly, we do have to address the digital divide in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do support a second internet cable. We do support devices in schools. However, it's not in our current costing, so all our costings are independently reviewed. We're the only party to have done so. What we believe for education is the most biggest barrier for kids is poverty and inequality. So we want to make schools as community hubs. But I would say that it's crucially important that kids do have access to the internet and to the tools of today, because this century we're going to see a massive growth in IT. We're going to see a massive growth in science and technology. These are the industries of the future, not the outdated industries of the fossil fuel past. And so we have to not just provide them with the tools, we have to ensure there's placements in higher education. So we want to fund 1,000 places in tertiary education so that they can study in those courses that will equip them for the industries of this century.
And the last speaker on this question is?
Look, we would promote it, absolutely. We need to get faster broadband here in New Zealand. I said before that I've travelled extensively. It's a lot quicker overseas, that is for sure. And so the Conservative Party would definitely promote the rollout of broadband, faster broadband, quicker, faster and more accessible right across the country. Thank you.
Yeah, my question was on New Zealand land ownership for foreigners. What are your guys' policies on that? Also, in China, for instance, the land is for Chinese only. So in New Zealand, we seem to have a different policy in some regards to that. It seems to be open doors for most people. Prove me wrong, tell me more about it. Because I mean, yeah, as far as I know, New Zealand land is there for just about anybody, or seems to be a bit more relaxed in other countries. Yeah.
Who would like to begin?
Oh,
right.
New Zealand land has to be safeguarded to ensure that it's protecting, so it's lifting New Zealand productivity and lifting New Zealand incomes. We oppose the foreign ownership of any of our sensitive land. We have done so consistently. It's not xenophobic. We say it's across the board policy regardless of where the foreigner comes from. If they're resident in New Zealand, then it's a different story. But the reality is that this isn't just bad for our sovereignty, it's bad for our environment. So with the Lochinvar Station as an example, that's going to be sold off to foreign interests, and it's for the purpose of intensive dairying, and that intensive dairying is going to severely impact the local river, and that local river is the foundation of that local environment. So it's not just an issue of foreign ownership in itself, it's an issue of our environment and protecting our clean green brand, which we talked about earlier.
Look, our leader recently broke the story about the Lochinvar Station, which is currently being sold to overseas interests, although that may stop because he broke it and released that information. But Conservative Party do not want to see rural land sold overseas, and if it's going to be sold, it must be sold to a New Zealand citizen. That's something that we would support and promote. Too much of it has gone already. We need to stop it, and we would look to do that. I might add that you can't go overseas, particularly like China. You can't go and buy land over there. You have to lease it. So we would encourage that similar sort of setup back here in New Zealand.
Yes, we're very much in line with what the other two parties have said. I know certainly in Iran where I grew up, nobody could own any of the land unless it was in like 51% partnership with an Iranian. And you know, we need to protect and safeguard our land, which is part of our pride and mana in this country. Selling it off to overseas investors and individuals doesn't really do much for us. It just makes them richer and uses up our resources and our land. So we would absolutely want to see it it protected from foreign investors, and alongside that we're against privatisation and supporting big business at the cost of the New Zealand environment and its individuals.
Isn't it funny now that other parties are coming on board? New Zealand First and Winston Peters has been saying this since day one. And how many, day one, 21 years ago, 21 years ago, how many of them called Winston racist and xenophobic? And now they're defending themselves against those same accusations. They have finally found out this is common sense stuff. We need to own our assets, we need to own our farmlands, we need to own our resources, or we will never be wealthy as a country. And forget about us, how about the next generation? How about our kids and our grandkids? Because what will they have left to inherit? And it's not about just the land, it's about the productivity. If we don't have that money coming into New Zealand, if our banks are owned by overseas, all those profits are going overseas. If our farms, our knowledge is going overseas, we cannot let that happen.
Freedoms compete. All right, my freedom to build a 30-foot wall on my property inhibits your freedom to enjoy the sunshine. The freedom of a large landowner to sell her or his property for millions and millions of dollars to overseas landowners inhibits the capacity of young New Zealand farmers to buy their way into their own farms. So we've got some very specific policies sitting around farm ownership and foreign ownership of land, because we want to protect New Zealanders' interests as well, including their capacity to buy their own land. In the first leadership debate, John Key was defending the right of large landowners to sell for a large price. David Cunliffe was protecting the interests of young farmers, saying we need to preserve their capacity to buy land. Here's our policy. You can buy land in New Zealand if you can show a substantial extra economic benefit over and above that which a New Zealand landowner would show. We need to keep our doors open for trading. We own land in other countries. We need to allow people to own land here, but with those very, very strict conditions around it. Clear economic benefit to New Zealanders.
I just heard the National Party policy. In order to buy land as a foreign person in New Zealand, you've got to demonstrate clear economic benefit to New Zealand. You also have to be able to show that no New Zealander was prepared to buy it also. I just want to clarify something about this kind of thing that also gets put up, you can't buy land in China. Well, actually the Chinese can't buy land in China, because there's this thing called the Communist Party that owns everything in China. So you just got to be careful how you make some of these comparisons. New Zealand, we've got to protect ourselves in terms of the way that we do that with foreign investment, and we do that now. The Lochinvar station is not sold. It is subject to those policies, and it is going through the OIA process now. We don't have plans to sell it. We have policies in place to ensure that if someone's going to buy it, it must demonstrate positive economic benefit for New Zealand. Thank you.
That's the end of the questions, and I shall ask Kevin to close the meeting.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'll just begin. I'm going to be fairly brief because it's been a long afternoon, and I'm sure you'll all agree with me that the candidates have done a wonderful job. So I'd like a round of applause for them. We all know them a lot better, and I think they very clearly answered the question that we set them before the meeting. They've stuck to their time brilliantly. And I think hopefully we're in a much better position now, if we haven't already decided how we're going to vote, to actually place our vote on the 20th. Before I say any more, and I'm going to be fairly brief, I just wanted to invite you all and the candidates to a cup of tea out in the foyer out there, and you can carry on the conversation out there in a more informal environment. And I'm sure you're all looking forward to a cup of tea. I just want to make a couple of comments about the questions that we posed to the candidates before they came. And the first question, you remember, was on the environment. And here I'm speaking as an environmental scientist. I've worked on the area of climate change since the 1970s. And one thing I just want to make very clear, these issues, whether it's water or climate change or any other environmental issues, are urgent. They urgently require attention. But the other thing that's very, very important is that people must understand that correcting or reversing these trends takes a very long time. And so the sooner we get on and start to do it meaningfully, the better we're going to actually clean up our environment. For example, modelling done on the Rotorua lakes 3 or 4 years ago showed that in order to get those lakes back to conditions where we could swim in them again would take something like 100 years. So when we go down the road of making our environment worse, is a very long road back. And in the case of other countries who've been down that road, and I know Denmark is one country I visited, 25 years it took them to actually reduce their nitrate leaching into the Baltic Sea by 50%. But they did it. How did they do it? They did it because they set meaningful targets, and they worked to those targets right through those 25 years, and they achieved it. And one of the things I would really encourage all the candidates to consider is in talking about how we're going to deal with these issues, whether it's the environment or it's how we deal with the issue of poverty, which is another major issue which we dealt with today. Setting targets puts certainty in place for the community and for businesses and for job creation and so on. And countries that have done this are showing this right now. In the United Kingdom, for example, they have a Climate Change Act, and they've got targets every 25 years or so about where they're headed. It's actually an act of Parliament. All companies know where they're going. We need to start thinking that way as well. And I think from what we've heard today and the responses to the questions, there's a real opportunity here for actually a cross-party accord to deal with some of these more important issues that we've been dealing with today, where we leave ideologies at the door and we actually sit down and really address the issues that are important and work out solutions and put the targets in place to achieve these for the benefit of everyone. Well, I'm not going to say any more than that. I think it's my time to thank people. We've already thanked the candidates, and that's a genuine thank you for all of you. Thank you very much for coming and for speaking so clearly this afternoon. I'd also like to take the opportunity of thanking Audrey Jarvis and her team. Audrey has steered the committee through to organising today, so if we could just put a round of applause for Audrey. To Barbara, of course. Where's Barbara gone? Barbara's done a wonderful job of chairing this afternoon. And finally, a big thank you to All Saints for allowing us to hold this meeting in their hall and for the logistical support they provided for this afternoon as well.
Timekeeper, Kevin. Rachel's been our timekeeper.
And the whole team, yes.
Yeah, Rachel has been our timekeeper.
Oh, the timekeeper, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Thank you, Rachel, very much for being so good on the time. So why don't we have a cup of tea now? Thank you very much.